For more DawgNation videos, check out YouTube. Hey, everybody, it's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by our friends at Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort today. So great to have our friends at Harrah's with us for what we're doing here, and great to have all of you with us there as well. So much fun to get into over the course of the next few minutes, whether it be our buddy Mike Griffith stopping by. We'll get a Georgia Farm Bureau practice report coming up with Mike. We'll deal with some of the lingering rumor mill stuff that's still out there, including hopefully helping Georgia fans kind of make sense of all that when it comes to Arik Gilbert. We'll try to do our best with that. But off the top of the program today, really, really fun. Big-time decommitment yesterday. If you're a Georgia fan, I think you ought to be paying very close attention to. In fact, I'm pretty sure you already are, but we'll talk about why as of next. It is all coming up. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by our friends at Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Harrah's Cherokee Resort. Find us online at Caesars.com/Harrah's-Cherokee.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We're going to have a lot of fun on today's show, and it's going to begin this way. I want to go back in time here a couple of weeks ago on the show, and the moment we're going back in time to was the immediate aftermath of four-star running back Branson Robinson making his UGA pledge. Now, here's the thing you know about a situation like that. Obviously, Georgia fans were thrilled that Robinson chose Georgia. He's a great-looking running back and a big-time fan favorite. Everybody's really happy about that. But the problem is that we like the mystery and we like being surprised and we like the excitement of unexpected news in recruiting. And while the Robinson pledge may have scratched the itch for Georgia fans who want to see the Dogs get a top prospect, it doesn't quite scratch the itch of having good news kind of coming out of nowhere, right? It just doesn't quite do that. So what we talked about after Branson Robinson made his pledge of, well, what's next for Georgia recruiting? And we say this all the time, that there's no, more significant tradition, it seems, for UGA fans and really probably college football fans in general on the heels of a big commitment. What's the next big piece of recruiting news that's going to come? And so on that show, that particular day after Branson Robinson made his announcement, we kind of ran through the names that would likely be, in the mix for Georgia. Those, what I called them, were bellwether names, the guys that you really could look at and know with certainty that Georgia was very much in the mix for, and you'd find out if those guys were indeed coming to Georgia. But then beyond that, I had a different category, of prospect. And these were the guys that, hey, this may be a little bit of an exaggeration. I may be stretching things just a bit, connecting Georgia to this prospect, some of the top names in the country. But wouldn't it be nice if we had something else that kind of connected Georgia to some of those names? And I want to rewind this from a couple of weeks ago, because one of the names that I mentioned, all of a sudden this seems more relevant now than maybe it did back then. So let's push the rewind button a couple of weeks ago. A recruit in particular that I brought up that now seems worth talking about once again. This is me from a couple of weeks past. I've got five-star wide receiver Luther Burden. He's at least visited Georgia. You're interested to see if anything comes of that beyond that. That's a name that you see connected to Georgia from time to time, in some online chatter. I'd like to see that grow a little bit more. That's at least worth paying attention to. Those are some of those guys that are maybe stretch goals a bit. So maybe I said this is me in real time now, and that was me from a couple of weeks ago. Hope you're following all of that. That's why we play the rewind clip when I play myself. That way, if you're listening podcast, you can kind of keep up with what's the current version of me versus what was the past version of me. But nonetheless, you heard me call five-star wide receiver Luther Burden, an Oklahoma commit at the time, a stretch goal. He's visited Georgia, but it'd be nice if you had something else out there that maybe felt like Georgia and Burden were even more connected together. And then there was that moment right there at the end of July when Burden was reported to be visiting Georgia again. My understanding is, based on Jeff Sintel's reporting, that at the time that didn't happen, that Burden didn't take that visit to Georgia. Not going to tell you, privately behind the scenes, don't believe I said this in the show, but privately behind the scenes, I was sort of thinking, well, I guess that's just sort of that, right? That it was nice that Georgia got him on campus. Obviously, pulling him away from Oklahoma is going to be a difficult thing to do. A second visit would have certainly been telling, but apparently that second visit didn't take place. And so, oh, well, I guess you move on to the next one when it comes to Luther Burden. But hold on here for a moment. Everything changes. This is the moment where the soundtrack would be completely different because yesterday we got some big news. Now, not totally unexpected. There'd been a little bit of rumblings and grumblings about this the couple of days prior to this, but yesterday it became official. Let me show you this on the screen. 5-star wide receiver Luther Burden, up until yesterday, an Oklahoma commit, says that he wants to thank the entire Oklahoma coaching staff for giving him an opportunity to be a part of the Sooner family, but after a long conversation with my family, I have decided to decommit from the University of Oklahoma. And the caption that he put on Twitter about this, Burden called this a business decision. So if you heard me a couple of weeks ago say, it was kind of nice that Georgia got Luther Burden on campus, you'd like to believe that Georgia's a real player here, but you need some sort of tangible piece of evidence, some sort of tangible piece of information that this is indeed true. Well, folks, you just got it. Luther Burden is now decommitted from Oklahoma. Now, I'm assuming that Oklahoma remains a factor in this recruitment. If I had to guess, I'd say Oklahoma still is involved here, and it could very well be when it's all said and done. Burden actually gravitates back towards Oklahoma. That's at least a possibility. It's worth considering. But the chances of Georgia being in play here, which for me probably seemed fairly remote when I mentioned him by name on a show a couple of weeks ago, now I think you have to say that is a lot more realistic. We've got national recruiting analysts who've suggested that over the course of the last 24 hours. We've had Dave Matter from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch kind of say is that the name of the paper there? You have Dave Matter, longtime guy covering the SEC. He has said that Georgia's a major player in all of this, and all of a sudden you have to take that pretty seriously. That indeed Georgia is all of a sudden now in play for the 5-star wide receiver Luther Burden. And what's interesting to some Georgia fans is the competition here is not just the Sooners, the school that Burden was once committed to. As I mentioned before, the St. Louis paper writing about this, because the other school that's in play here all of a sudden is Missouri. After all, Burden hails from the state of Missouri, or at least in that Missouri area there, that he kind of hails from that area. And all of a sudden, Missouri, because it's only a couple hours from his home there in East St. Louis, all of a sudden now the University of Missouri is kind of back more of a player here there too. And for a lot of Georgia fans, they say, oh gosh, the news just keeps getting better. Not only is Georgia a player for 5-star wide receiver Luther Burden, but the chief competition may be Missouri. Georgia fans don't really think of Missouri as a big-time recruiting power, and obviously I guess it's a little bit easier and better to be battling Missouri than it is some of the other programs you could battle. But this is one of those moments where I feel like it's kind of an important aside to bring up, that Eli Drinkwitz is kind of quietly doing some things there in Columbia. If you think about like the bottom half of the SEC, and a lot of these programs have recently changed over coaching staffs. You've got Auburn, Tennessee, fresh, brand new coaches. You've got like Mike Leach, second-year coach, Lane Kiffin, second-year coach, Eli Drinkwitz, second-year coach there at Missouri. A lot of this bottom half of the SEC that have either coaches in their first or second year, very few of them can say they've established the actual momentum that Drinkwitz established at Missouri. They won more games a year ago than I think some people probably thought they would. They're doing better in recruiting than you probably realize. I think they're up to like 14th or something in the composite rating from 24/7 Sports. They're actually doing pretty well in recruiting. And you know what? I think that Drinkwitz is trying to kind of make a little noise here and thinking that he could be kind of a player for a guy like Burden. I want to show you this tweet. This got some attention yesterday. So, Eli Drinkwitz, if you're watching a video, you can obviously see this. I guess he gets a new Mercedes. Now, first of all, let me say this, is that the kind of vehicle you expect to see an SEC coach driving? Connor Riley, our producer today, is vehemently shaking his head no. Nothing wrong with the vehicle, don't get me wrong. It's a nice-looking thing. But when you think SEC head coach, it's big pickup truck, right? I mean, pretty much every coach in this league drives a big pickup. Now, I guess Nick Saban probably drives a Mercedes there too, so because he owns the dealership, so maybe Drinkwitz is following the footsteps here. But this car is a little too fancy, and this car looks like it's getting way too many city miles to be, like that's not a daily driver that you're beating up and down the highways of the South trying to go get recruits in. So first of all, I'm going to call all kinds of suspicion on the vehicle that Eli Drinkwitz is showing off there. But the point of showing the picture is to say this. So this is what Drinkwitz puts out on Twitter when he shows off his brand new Mercedes-Benz vehicle. He says it's a new season and a new car. He gives a shout out to the dealership in which he gets the vehicle from, and he calls it a 5-star ride. Now, most of us read way too much into most of the social media posts from SEC coaches and players. A lot of folks thought, on the heels of Luther Burden decommitting from Oklahoma, the fact that Missouri's a player here, geographically a little bit of an advantage in the Burden recruitment, the fact that Drinkwitz is talking about 5-star rides on social media here is a little bit of a wink and a nod to the direction of Luther Burden. It may very well be the case, and honestly, I think it sets up a situation that's going to be pretty interesting. Georgia is fairly obviously in the mix for Burden, and one of only a couple of schools that can say that. And most Georgia fans say, if it's a battle with Missouri for Burden services, then by all means bring that on. That's not an opponent that most UGA fans respect. I guess to wrap all this up, I'll say, as a reminder, Missouri's doing a little better in recruiting than you might think, but for Georgia, who desperately needs a big-time playmaker, a wide receiver of high value. That's clearly what Burden is, and all of a sudden what was once a pipe dream a few weeks ago seems a lot more real right now. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. So glad to have you with us, no matter how you're getting to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, right there on the page of DawgNation.com. We've got a big announcement coming up, by the way, as well, for some really fun stuff we're going to be doing on our video platform at DawgNation.com. This is really amazing. I can't wait to tell you more about this. We're going to do that really, really soon. Of course, podcast folks, however you get to us there, the Apple Player, Google Player, worldfamousDawgNation.com. Some of you listen right there on Spotify, SoundCloud, everything else. Just thanks for being with us there. And, of course, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Always a lot of fun, too. None of this, though, would be possible without our friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. They make the show available to you here today, and they remind you as you're getting ready for the upcoming football season, great chance to get away, just a couple-hour drive in the mountains of western North Carolina from where I'm sitting here in Atlanta. You get Harris Cherokee Casino Resort or Harris Cherokee Valley River. Fun table games there on the casino floor, but the book is also open there as well. So if you've got your opinions of what's going to go down in college or pro football here this year, make some money on those opinions with our friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. Get settled in, make your sports wagers at either of their properties, and enjoy the best that the gaming world has to offer, with not just the table games now, and the slot machines, of course, but the book now open for sports gaming in the mountains of western North Carolina. Y'all make sure you check that out. I'll give you the website to go to so you can book your travel and find out more details. It's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. That'll get you in touch with Harris Cherokee Casino Resort today. Really good stuff on all of that. All right, it is Mike Griffith coming up in a moment. We'll do a Georgia Farm Bureau practice report with him, and there's a lot to get into when it comes to everything that's been going on around UGA as of late. But I want to spend my own moment on that before we get with Mike here. Let's go around the doghouse here today. And I want to follow up on some of the stuff involving Arik Gilbert, because one of the things I'm commonly hearing from some of you, and I think this is a genuine statement, genuine request being made of UGA fans, they just don't know what to make of the Arik Gilbert situation. They see wild and crazy reports like what the dude from Rivals.com put out the other day, kind of fanning the flames on the rumor that there was some sort of altercation involving Gilbert. And you see true aggressive denials on the part of almost anyone closely connected to Georgia related to that, and there is honest confusion about where all this stands and what all this means. I'll show you the latest example of this. I mentioned Mike Farrell from Rivals and what he wrote, and upon sharing that on social media, Chris Milton, the father of Georgia running back Kendall Milton, leapt right into the fray upon seeing the story, saying, LOL, that's blatantly way off, shaking his head, he says, about what has been reported about Arik Gilbert, who all has been officially said by Georgia is that he's currently away from the team dealing with a personal issue. Now, let me just be real clear about this for a moment. I'm not a reporter. I don't pretend to be a reporter. I don't want to be confused with being a reporter. That's not the game I'm trying to play. That's not the world I'm trying to live in. In this particular case, though, I have talked to enough people that I can say with confidence, based on the people that I've talked to who know far more about this situation than I do, close to the situation, that what was reported earlier and what you may have seen the rumors on and things like that, that the people that I've talked to are very confident that's just simply not true. And I don't come on here and try to play the sources game and things like that. I let other people do that. All I want to do is talk about the news. I don't want to break the news. That's not the job that I want to do. In this particular case, though, I have talked to enough people who do feel confident to say that what you may have heard about Gilbert is likely not true. And once again, to go back to what I said a moment ago, which is a lot of Georgia fans are left feeling confused about this. You don't know who to believe. Here's the one thing I think I can say with confidence, that when you hear people closely connected to Georgia, whether it be the father of a player on social media or, people kind of behind the scenes or whatever else who are willing to let their opinions be leaked out, when there is this much confidence about the opinion that Georgia has all of this under control and that the situation that's inside the program is being handled at a satisfactory degree, when there's this much confident spoken word about all of that, that's the thing that as a fan, I think that you ought to take, really seriously here, that the rumor mill is going to try to step in and fill the void. As I've said a million times, the availability of information for Georgia football is sometimes down here, low. The appetite for that information is always really, really high. And there will always be people that see a market to kind of try to fill the void that exists between the appetite for information involving Georgia football and the availability of Georgia football. And this situation is really no different on all of that. I have talked to people who know this situation far better than I do, who are far closer to this situation than I am, and they feel very confident that this scenario is quickly on its way to being rectified. And I think you ought to take that pretty seriously. Now, one more point on this while we're around the doghouse here today. As far as the on-field impact of Arik Gilbert, I think it's really important to note what people outside the bubble of DawgNation are saying about all of this. Because the one thing we said on Monday's show was Gilbert not being spotted at the scrimmage, status unknown as far as when he'll be back in the fold doing things for Georgia again, that this was never a make or break issue when it comes to Georgia game 1 against Clemson. Maybe by the end of the season, that Gilbert on a new team and a new offense, playing a new position, maybe he works himself into being a very important part of the Georgia roster. But on this subject, we've actually been fairly consistent throughout the entirety of the discussion since Gilbert came to Georgia. This is one of the most amazing prospects I've ever seen. I was disappointed as a high schooler when he chose LSU over Georgia. I was thrilled when he decided to transfer to Georgia. But the process of becoming a big part of this Georgia offense, there was just going to be a little bit of time to be taken to be a part of all of that. And, you can take my opinion with a grain of salt on that if you want, but I thought David Cobb from CBS Sports kind of echoed that sentiment in a similar way. And for someone who's not a Georgia reporter, not someone, closely connected to the program necessarily, to kind of echo those same kinds of things, I think maybe that's something else that Georgia fans ought to take pretty seriously. And let me read you a couple of sentences from something that the CBS writer recently wrote related to Gilbert. And once again, it kind of reminds us of the fact that Gilbert's unknown status for the Clemson game right now doesn't really change the outcome of this game at all. What David Cobb writes is this: now is not the time to sell Georgia stock. Arik Gilbert was a late addition to the roster and already something of a bonus for a program poised for big things with or without a player with undeniable promise. Once again, that's David Cobb from CBS Sports. Now, is Georgia loaded at receiver apart from Arik Gilbert? Honestly, I think we're still trying to figure out just how much Georgia really does have when it comes to its pass-catching weapons and its targets and things like that. But the idea that Gilbert was going to be the deciding factor, the missing piece for that game against Clemson, I think whether it be CBS writer or us here on DawgNation Daily or whatever else in between, I think most of us have said, no, the actual deciding factor for the Georgia game against Clemson going to be things other than Gilbert, a guy who really has just arrived in the program and is in the midst of kind of learning so much new stuff. So do with that what you will, but that is kind of where things stand here at the moment. Of course, that is around the doghouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. Now, before we're done, huge compliment out there for a Georgia running back, which I want to make sure we spend some time on and talk about what that might mean for the Georgia offense here this year. Also, we started the show with big news involving 5-star wide receiver Luther Burden. There's also more big news for a Georgia wide receiver target that you're not going to want to miss on today's show. So we'll do all of that coming up. But for now, the latest on Gilbert, whatever else is happening around Georgia practice as the preparations continue for September 4th against the Clemson Tigers. Let's do all of that with a practice report with our buddy Mike Griffith, brought to you by the Georgia Farm Bureau here on DawgNation Daily.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Georgia Farm Bureau practice report with Mike Griffith here. And, of course, it has been busy around the Athens front the last few days, and it will continue to be busy as the Dogs get ready for Clemson coming up on September 4th. Mike, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because I'm sure you're probably tired of talking about it too, but important to note the emphatic way that people close to the Georgia program, whether it be on the record like Chris Milton on Twitter or off the record, people that I've talked to, and I'm sure people you've talked to there as well, the emphatic way in which that people are denying the most salacious rumors involving Gilbert, I think you have to take that seriously. And I say that, Mike, as not someone who reports the news for a living, but as someone who consumes the news and then talks about whatever the news is in a show like this. You know, for the fan who's left wondering what to believe, the emphatic way in which people very close to Georgia are saying, no, the crazy rumors about altercations and things like that, the stuff that you've heard and that not being true, that to me seems like the kind of thing that needs to be taken seriously. What do you make of all of that?
Well, I mean, you know, social media is where people start rumors, people who don't use their real names, anonymous people on Twitter that have have an agenda to try to make Georgia look bad, to try to make the kid look bad. I mean, think about how sick in the head some people must be to make things up about a 19-year-old going through personal issues. I mean, that's just sick in the head. These are the same people that attack recruits that don't pick their schools. It's really an indictment on society that there's people like that out there, and somehow fan bases rally around this dark, ugly side. This is where passion goes wrong, when people get creepy like that. No altercation. The kid has personal problems. That's not saying that things didn't go awry, but there's no personal altercation with Kirby Smart. Look, there's over 100 players on this football team, and Georgia does a nice job of keeping things in-house. But something like that wouldn't be kept in-house. I've covered practices back when practices were open, back when there was transparency. I saw what college football looked like, okay? And coaches don't get into altercations with players. It doesn't go that far. Now, will a player yell at a coach? Yeah, that happens. It happens on this Georgia team. Players get frustrated in workouts, and yeah. But Arik Gilbert's issue is not tied to anything like that. And you know, you just wonder who these sick people are. And this is again, when you see social media, this is, you know, you just shake your head and you go, who is this person? You know, what is this person's life like? That they want to, you know, spread rumors and false innuendos about 19-year-olds that they can't defend themselves, right? That's sad. That's what I think. I think it's sick. I think it's sad. I think it's an indictment on the anonymity of social media. The problems continue to grow, not just in sports but in politics. Yeah, it's a dangerous place right now.
So I've said over and over again, this is going back months, that, you know, I felt like that Gilbert's acclimation to Georgia was going to be somewhat, I don't want to say slow, but it was going to be deliberate, right? It wasn't one of those things where I expected him to sort of step right on the field and be the dominant player, dominant pass catcher for UGA. I never really felt like he was the missing piece, the missing quotient one way or another in a game like Clemson. And so the fact that he's not here right now, I don't think that changes the outlook for me, Georgia versus Clemson. I think it's a tough game, whether he plays or whether he doesn't play. But I think it does kind of shine a spotlight a little bit, Mike, on the fact that there are still a lot of unknowns for Georgia when it comes to this receiving core situation. You know, if you want to count Jermaine Burton as something of a given because he had the big game against Mississippi State a year ago, or if you want to count Kearis Jackson as something of a given because he had the back-to-back 100-yard receiving games, you know, against Auburn and Tennessee. They weren't there on Saturday, as Kirby Smart indicated, and maybe that was a reason why the offensive vibe seemed to be a little lackluster based on the chatter and the comments that came from that scrimmage, to the extent that you take a small snapshot like that seriously. But Georgia, I think, whether Gilbert's playing or not, has a real job ahead of it the next couple of weeks to find out who can you really depend on. Of a long list of guys that could be big-time performers, and I'll include tight ends in this as well, who can you really rely on and who can help you move the chains against a very good defense like Clemson? To me, Mike, that's a huge part of the story as you kind of move on with the remainder of this preseason moment here before the first game kicks off on September 4th?
Well, Arik Gilbert wasn't going to be a big factor early in the season to begin with, and this is what some people that don't follow it closely or don't understand football can't seem to comprehend. It takes time, as you said, to learn the Georgia offense. This is a guy who didn't go through spring drills with Georgia. This is a guy who was changing positions. This is a guy who's learning new terminologies. That all in getting timing with a new quarterback. This takes time. This is not the NFL. This is not a video game. This is not plug and play. This is a 19-year-old kid who moved and changed circumstances and residences and teammates and football language and position and quarterback and receivers coach, and you think he's going to plug and play? Then you don't know much about football. Now, this was a guy who was transitioning and trying to learn a new spot and probably would have worked his way in during the season. I still might. I don't know how long he's out. It's indefinite. I wouldn't expect any time soon. But the Gilbert thing is way, way, way overrated. And part of that is because it was such a big story at which school he would go to. He was once committed to Florida, and then LSU flirted with getting him back, and Georgia made a couple runs at him. And so recruiting hype always, my goodness, we've heard so much about Cedric Van Pran, and we don't even know if he can play center now this year, too. We're still, Jamari Saylor is still having to take snaps there. Recruiting is so overhyped. You have to be really careful. As far as who you can count on, I don't know. Can we count on Jermaine Burton? I don't know that. He couldn't get through spring healthy. He's missed, he's just now getting out there in fall. He was limited in bowl practices. He had one huge game. Other than that, I don't think he had more than 5 catches or 60 yards in a game. I'm not ready to, he's money. I'm not ready to say he's money. I don't care what Terrence Edwards says. I need to see it on the field more than one game. Can we see more than one good game? Can we see the guy stay healthy more than 2 months at a time? I can't count on that. It takes time. Again, a young player transitioning. The name is bigger than the level of consistency. The person you count on is JT Daniels. And as far as what receiver gets the ball, as Kirby said, that's really dependent on the defense. It's not like JT goes in the huddle and says, Harris, I'm looking for you on this. But that's not how it works, right? He goes to the line of scrimmage, and he's got an order that he's going to go through in the receiver. And then he gets to the line, and he sees the defensive alignment. And he sees who's on. He says, you know what? I see the matchup against this scheme. This is going to be my progression, okay? He reads it as the game. That's the beauty of the air raid concepts is, the defense is always giving you something. But you don't really know until you go to the line. You call your play, and your receivers have their routes, and then based on the defense, Brandon, you choose your receiver. You don't choose your receiver and then hope he's open. You base it on the defense. That's why Todd Monken said that it's going to be up to the defense to determine who gets the football, because JT's going to make the read and go to the player that's going to be open against that defensive alignment.
It's a Georgia Farm Bureau practice report with Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, we love all the things the Georgia Farm Bureau is doing for our local communities, supporting those local communities with their agricultural programs, but also helping folks save money on their home insurance, their life insurance, their auto insurance, all the things that go along with that. Georgia Farm Bureau stepping up in a huge way when it comes to all of that. And you can actually find out more about this yourself, how you can take big-time advantage of everything that Georgia Farm Bureau has going on. Just go to gfbinsurance.com. That's gfbinsurance.com, and you can enjoy some big savings with our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau, because Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. So make sure you check that out today. Mike, boy, it certainly seems like there's no shortage of injuries to talk about with Georgia online chatter yesterday about Darnell Washington, Tyke Smith, minor things maybe, but nonetheless added to a list that seems to be growing with Warren Erickson maybe near the top of that. I don't think what Georgia's dealing with is unique to UGA. These kinds of camp practice injuries are a factor for all teams, but for Georgia right now, they are dealing with their share of those, are they not?
Yeah, Kirby said that Saturday, and that was kind of the deal. I mean, you had 6-7 projected starters that were out. And it's not what you want to hear. Not the script for a championship season, to be missing almost 33% of your projected starters in your first scrimmage. Some guys more serious than others, and again, this isn't a video game. You don't hit the button and everybody's back to 100. It's not how it works. You almost start to look a little bit deeper at the Georgia strength and conditioning program and wonder, is Nick Saban really onto something over there? Is Georgia going too hard? Is there something happening for this many guys to be grinded into the ground? And we're still 2.5 weeks before the opener. It does seem like a lot. I know guys get nicked up playing football, but they didn't play a whole lot of football. I mean, Warwick, I'm still trying to figure out how your center got hurt on the first day of practice and they're not even hitting yet. I mean, I think it's cause for concern and scrutiny, and the reason why is because the expectations are so high. When you're playing a national championship or bust, which seems to be the rules for Georgia. I guess for ESPN, I guess for the Big Ten writer that called Georgia the biggest underachiever, I guess he was willing to overlook the fact that Michigan hasn't even played in a Big Ten championship game, and the game's 10 years old, and that Texas has had one 10-win season in 11 years, even though they have the largest. But I guess it's convenient to zero in on Georgia and just jump on Georgia, which, by the way, it's kind of it doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense to me, because on the one hand, I hear the national media tell me that Kirby Smart and Georgia is this underachiever. But then on the other hand, Brandon, I see Georgia with 5 consecutive top 5 preseason ratings, which is all about perception. And here they are again in the top 5, and yet there's only one preseason All-SEC guy. So Kirby Smart must be a heck of a coach if they're preseason number 5 and they only got one first-team guy. I think. I don't know how you can have it both ways. But somehow some of these national writers from other conferences, again, the Big Ten writer, wants to talk about what an underachiever Michigan is, and there's Ohio State, which can't even stay in the game for 2 quarters against Alabama with Justin Fields, and yet Stetson Bennett can beat Alabama in Tuscaloosa for 2 quarters. But Georgia's the underachiever? Come again, please? Ohio State with 10 guys drafted into the NFL as well, I might add. So I don't want to hear about what an underachiever Georgia is. I don't want to dial into the national media because they don't know what the hell they're talking about if you're going to call Georgia an underachiever with 4 straight top 10 finishes. I don't see many programs doing that out there. So to me, there's a lot of grasping at low-hanging fruit. There are some real concerns, but my concern isn't Kirby Smart or Georgia being an underachiever. My concern is real-world stuff like, guys getting a little banged up and opening against a great football team that hasn't lost to an SEC team in the regular season since Georgia in 2014.
So I'm not quite sure how we got on the topic of underachieving, but interesting stuff nonetheless. Let me just finish with this. Interesting piece at DawgNation.com the other day looking at some of the guys for Georgia who may have stock up. I mean, it's easy to kind of fixate on some of the small-scale injuries that Georgia's dealt with, but there were some nice stories and are some nice stories that continue to be coming out of some of what happened, whether folks who got a chance to see it at the scrimmage on Saturday and some of the other, buzz that's ongoing there. Looks like Jamon Dumas-Johnson's turning some heads right now. You love to see that. Kenny McIntosh, who you wrote about at DawgNation.com. There are also some good stories that seem to be coming out of these Georgia practice in the early going here. Why don't you take a couple of seconds in the time that we have left to kind of highlight a couple of those?
Yeah, I think the running backs have all had a really good fall camp. That's one position I'm really bullish on. That with Zamir White and Kendall Milton and Kenny McIntosh and James Cook, Dejon Edwards. To me, that core has been really strong. I think the front 7, particularly the defensive line, has been outstanding. I know some of the guys in the linebacker core are a little nicked up right now, but I still think this front 7 is really special. You feel good about special teams with Will Muschamp, and certainly Podlensny and Camarda as well. Return game should be strong. I feel good about those things. Question marks on the offensive line, question marks in the secondary. Hearing good things now about Amir Speed, Latavius Brainey, Keely Ringo starting to emerge a little bit, which we knew he would. It takes time. Once again, once he gets those reps, it makes all the difference in the world when a player gets reps. The star rating, system is a good indicator, but it's not a perfect indicator. And so, maybe Broderick Jones now, starting to hear some good things about him at the left tackle position. Not sure what's going to happen with Xavier Truss. It's year 3. If he gets passed on the depth chart, not sure where he ends up, if anywhere. That'll be interesting. So you hear good things about Tate Ratledge in the run game. So there's been some good, and obviously Jamari Salyer. I mean, is there anything Jamari can't do? He left tackle. We know his true position is guard, but now he's playing center. I do think Van Pran will probably be next man up, but it's good to know that Jamari is also there. So, you hear good things about different players and positions from one scrimmage to one practice to the next practice. But again, we won't truly know until September 4th. And won't that be interesting? Clemson, by the way, having issues with their center.
Yeah.
Looking at moving Matt Brockhurst inside, which tells you, hey, that's a red flag. Maybe these over-under guys, Brandon, have it right. I heard they got the over-under in the 50s, and when I first saw that number, I about passed out. You got to be kidding me. Look at that in the first half. But now I was starting to go, well, wait a minute. Now they build those fountains and big buildings out there in Vegas with money. They don't do that by accident. These guys know what they're talking about. So maybe this opening game might be a little bit more of a grind than a shootout as first thought.
Mike, interesting stuff. Thanks for being here on the Georgia Farm Bureau Practice Report. Obviously, there'll be a lot more good stuff coming from UGA in the days to come as the Dogs get ready for that big game against Clemson, and we'll look forward to reading that from you.
Thanks, Brandon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, interesting stuff there. We'll transition now to our SEC Through. Let me just say this real quick, though, when it comes to, Mike, wanted to talk about the most overrated or whatever it was that Adam Rittenberg wrote the other day to ESPN.com. There's a way in which that's kind of a compliment. If you want to compare, as Mike did a moment ago, Georgia to Michigan or Texas. The reason why, Michigan and Texas might not rank as the most overrated team in college football anymore is because no one even expects it from Michigan now, right? They've been out of the loop for such a long time that at this point in time, no one even expects Michigan to be good anymore. So they're not. I guess the word is not overrated; it's underachiever. No one even thinks of Michigan as a great underachiever anymore because at this point in time, the expectation of what they're going to achieve is just so much lower. The last few years, the reason why. The same thing for Texas there too. Unparalleled resources and really, for the most part, pretty good recruiting compared to most of college football. But after a while, it's just kind of we've sort of been there and done that. They don't even rank as the biggest underachiever because people just kind of moved on. So if Georgia actually ranks as biggest underachiever in college football, you can debate if that's even true or not. But if they do rank that way, it's actually at least complimentary in comparison to Michigan and Texas, who at this point aren't even relevant enough to kind of rank in the underachieving category. And as far as whether or not Georgia as a program is an underachiever, I mean, here's the one thing that you just got to take this head on, right? And maybe Georgia fans, don't love to consider this, but it's just a factual truth that after Georgia won the SEC and made the college football playoff in 2017, the last 3 years since then, Georgia has started the year at whatever ranking, and in the last 3 years has finished below that mark. They have finished the season below where they started, end of season ranking compared to preseason ranking the last 3 years. And that is obviously a little bit of a burden that Georgia has to wear as it gets ready to start this upcoming season. Now, the great news is, and we would all agree with this, that Georgia has a great chance to change that trend here this year. But you can't avoid that. You can't pretend that isn't true. That must be acknowledged when you discuss what Georgia has facing it here this year. National championship or bust, we've shrugged that off every time it's come up. No, we don't believe that's true. That's letting the competition for the Dogs down way too easy. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for Georgia to win national championships in future years. But is it improvement or bust? Better than it's been the last couple of years or bust? I mean, obviously there is pressure to certainly win the SEC East again and then do something else beyond that, as we've said before. I can listen to a discussion of Georgia needs to be in the playoff this year, given the fact they haven't been there since 2017, and they start the year in such an exclusive category of teams who have a chance to do that. I can listen to that conversation a little bit, and the good news is I don't believe the Georgia coaches and players who are part of this program would shy away from that discussion at all. I'll give you our SEC through more of that coming up in a moment. Let me also give a shout-out to my friends at the Finish Long Drink here. Interesting stuff there when it comes to getting ready for the upcoming season and the nice warm weather we're enjoying right now. And frankly, anytime's a good time to be together with friends and having a good time with our friends at the Finish Long Drink. Comes in a can, looks like a beer, but it's not a beer. It's a ready-to-drink cocktail. What that means is you can pop the top and just be kind of drinking it right away. No mixing to be done here. You don't have to be a professional mixologist to take care of all this. You can just enjoy it, and it's right there for you. Whether it's the long drink cranberry, the traditional, which comes in a blue can that kind of has like a grapefruit fruit flavor, and obviously the gin kick, for which you certainly have come to expect the finished long drink to provide that for you. Long drink strong, long drink zero. Going back to the 1950s, this started in Helsinki, and now it's in America. And if you go to thelongdrink.com, you can find out where it is for you. The finished long drink, check it out right there, longdrink.com. You can find out a lot more about where you can pick that up near you. I promised you some more recruiting news. Let me give it to you here for a moment. So Andre Green Jr. is a guy we've talked about before as a big-time receiving target for the Georgia Bulldogs, certainly a name to know. And the good news is that Green Jr. has dropped his top 6, and Georgia in the mix here. I'll show you the edit here from Andre Green Jr., which has the Dogs along with Penn State and North Carolina, LSU, Clemson, and Oregon. It's always funny to me. It seems like Georgia is always like the middle graphic in a lot of this stuff that goes on there. Now, in the case of Green Jr., I don't know that that's necessarily indicative of where he's going. And by the way, another great job by Hayes Fawcett here. The LSU guys got the Mardi Gras beads, or the version of green in the LSU uniforms got the Mardi Gras beads. There's some cool touches to that edit there, but nice to see Georgia kind of right in the middle there for Andre Green Jr. After talking about Luther Burden off the top of the show, important to remind you that another receiver that Georgia's kind of in the mix for. Just see where, obviously, Luke Doty, the South Carolina starting quarterback, is dealing with an injury. We talked on Monday's show about how Shane Beamer was kind of poo-pooing South Carolina fans who were getting all doomy and gloomy about Doty's injury, saying everything's going to be fine. I'm not quite so sure if that's such an easy sell now or not. Football Scoop and other places have had a story on this. So South Carolina's actually got a graduate assistant. Now, I apologize, his name escapes me, but a graduate assistant who has now been called back into active duty. He's on the active roster now for South Carolina because they were thin at quarterback. They need other quarterbacks that can just, help them get through a practice, and all of a sudden one of their GAs is now on the active roster. If you're Shane Beamer, you're trying to sell the idea that the Doty injury is no big deal. This is probably not the easiest way to do that. It's also kind of brought some people, back to maybe the way the quarterback situation was handled last year there as well, that quarterbacks left that program, and all of a sudden now maybe the Gamecocks fans wish they had some of those guys back. So a little bit of an issue for South Carolina at quarterback right now, and that's probably a story worth paying attention to, especially with all these first-year SEC teams with brand-new coaches trying to get as many wins as they can. Whatever South Carolina's dealing with the quarterback situation may not be the easiest thing. By the way, speaking of the Gamecocks, they're also one of the finalists for four-star tight end Oscar Delp. Remind you, many of you are aware that I am a part of the high school football season this year, once again with our friends at Score Atlanta. Games will be televised on Peachtree TV and throughout the season as well, streamed on CBS46.com. I'll be doing Corky Kell Classic Friday from Gainesville, then 2 games Saturday from Mercedes-Benz Stadium. But tonight, the Corky Kell Classic actually kicks off, a chance to see Oscar Delp in action. It's about a year ago at this time, with last year's Corky Kell Classic, that Delp got so much big attention, really became such a big name to know on the recruiting front, got a bunch of offers. I think Michigan kind of came in first, and then a lot of other big attention kind of came rolling in after that because he performed very big in this spot. So tonight on TV, Peachtree TV in Atlanta or CBS46.com, no matter where you are, get a chance to watch Delp tonight as part of a fun doubleheader of games from West Forsyth tonight as the Corky Kell Classic kind of gets going. That's going to be a bunch of fun. We'll go ahead and make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort, I also want to talk about the Georgia Bulldogs some more here right now, too, for a moment. This is something that's been out there for a couple of days, but I wanted to at least make sure we spent some time talking about it because, as we said before, one of the big stories for Georgia as we move through the rest of what's remaining left in the preseason, getting ready for the start of the upcoming season, is what's going to happen with Georgia looking to establish those playmakers. I thought Connor Riley, when we interviewed him on Tuesday, brought up a really good point. Given the fact that Georgia seems to be so deep at running back, so deep at tight end, maybe are you playing more what you call 22 personnel, with 2 tight ends, 2 running backs in the game, because you want as many of those kinds of guys on the field as possible. And there's a very good chance that's exactly what Georgia does, or at least in at times, just given the depth there at that spot. And in terms of running backs who could really maximize their potential this season, boy, James Cook is a name that you're looking at right now on the basis of what Jim Nagy, who runs the Senior Bowl, what Nagy recently put out on Twitter, really showing some strong praise for Cook. I thought this was interesting, and I want to read this to you. Here's Jim Nagy on Twitter about James Cook, saying stats won't jump off the page since James Cook's sharing the load at running back at Georgia, but he's undoubtedly going to be one of the most talented running backs in the 2022 draft. Most dynamic feat of any running back that the Senior Bowl has evaluated, and a legit wide receiver versatility there as well, which gets really interesting because some of you want to see Georgia throw to those running backs a lot more. You want to see that be a big, important component of the Bulldogs' passing attack. And I think there's plenty of reason to believe that is going to be the case because when you've got guys like this, Mike mentioned, Kenny McIntosh a little earlier, I think that's a guy that you can throw to as well. That probably will be something that Georgia's looking to spring on Clemson come September 4th. Now, as far as the fact that Cook plays in a rotation, that he's not getting the lion's share of the carries, and really maybe nobody in that Georgia running back room getting the lion's share of the carries, they're all split up amongst each other. I thought when James Cook spoke to reporters a few days ago, I thought he said everything you want to hear a player say in terms of not being worried about that kind of stuff at all. Good stuff from James Cook about sharing the spotlight. This is from just a couple of weeks ago.
All I'm trying to do is just win games this year. Just go out, national championship and SEC championship. That's all I'm focused on. That comes like when you do the right things. So like if I get the ball, I don't. If I do, I do. That's kind of what it is.
I mean, that's the perfect team first attitude that you want to have. And it's the kind of thing that I do think helps Georgia kind of add the team chemistry he wants to have. But I think that Cook is also factually correct there, that if he does the things that he needs to do in terms of helping Georgia win, then his own individual accolades will truly probably take care of themselves. And to think that James Cook could be as dynamic a weapon in the passing game as he potentially is in the running game, if not more so, boy, that's a reason for Dog fans to be excited about the season that's on its way. All right, we'll wrap up today. Good stuff all the way around. Of course, Gator hater roll call. We love those Georgia fans who hate those lousy, stinking Gators. That's one of the things that we're proud of around here. And we'll also remind you as well that sometimes when we honor our Gator hater roll call, we'll give out our golden shoe for that. But other times, it's just kind of whatever we want it to be. Today, maybe an example of that. Former UGA golfer Keith Mitchell, now on the PGA Tour, has actually been kind of an interesting dust-up as of late with Joel Damon and Phil Mickelson and some guys there about a big money match they had. He's also been a part of a big money situation in a completely different regard. Keith Mitchell, the former UGA golfer, getting a chance to ring the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange going back to Tuesday. That's a pretty cool thing to do. And I got to say, it's kind of a bucket list type thing to be able to do. So good to see the former UGA golfer getting a chance to do that. We'll make him the golden shoe winner because of it. Speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, how about a Gator hater countdown 73 days from right now? We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Harrah's Cherokee Casino Resort. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We'll take your comments on both Facebook and YouTube. We can talk about everything you want to talk about. We'll roll through as many of these as we can, and we'll get ready to bounce out of here on a Wednesday after that. Hope you're getting ready for all the fun stuff that is to come. And, of course, we've got SEC Country Live this afternoon, 3 p.m. on the SEC Country video channels. So a lot of fun stuff, a lot of good stuff, and we appreciate you being here with us for all of it. Let me pull up some YouTube comments first. We'll do YouTube, and then we'll do Facebook, and we will have a good time all the way around. All right. Here we go. On YouTube. Thomas Van Santa giving you a what's up, BA, and a go Braves. Yeah, listen, the Braves thing is for real right now. They are playing good baseball, as hot as anybody. Yaskari Noah coming back yesterday. You love to see that against the Miami Marlins. So a really good time, Nature Gator says thoughts on Scott Frost in Nebraska. So I actually don't know all the details of the Frost thing as of yet. This is something that's kind of snuck up on me a little bit. Are you briefed on that? Brief me on the Scott Frost thing because I don't believe I fully know all of this.
So according to a report from Brett McMurphy of the Action Network.
Yeah, he's with Action Network now.
Essentially, it was some unauthorized use of analysts, specifically their conducting of team workouts and team-related workouts away from campus last season during the coronavirus pandemic. Quite frankly, and this is a personal opinion on this, Nebraska was not the only team doing this a season ago. They just happened to be dumb enough to get caught.
So they're practicing away from campus and they're using analysts in an on-field capacity. Is that what the charge is?
I don't know if it's the analyst in an on-field capacity as much as the analysts were maybe the ones who were organizing the team workouts.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not scandalized by this.
Yeah, my tolerance for that's pretty high. And mean, this is where my some days I just can't help but go into a conspiracy. This almost feels like the phone calls coming from inside the house on this. I think there's as good a chance as anything is that someone with connections to Lincoln is trying to, Lincoln, Nebraska here, is trying to drum this up on Frost to undermine him as much as it is anybody outside the program, because that's a pretty nickel and dime offense all the way around.
At the rate that the NCAA conducts their investigations, the NCAA might not be around to issue a final penalty on Nebraska when it comes to all of this.
Yeah, so I had heard some chatter about that. That doesn't strike me as the kind of thing that's all that problematic, but could potentially be useful for some people who may want Scott Frost out of Lincoln, Nebraska, because at this point in time, that is a very real thing. Bank 6 says, I wouldn't punish Nebraska. They might need that extra practice. Let's see what else. John Hendricks worrying about the idea that football capacity could be cut down. I mean, listen, I think you got to pay close attention to all this, right? I mean, I don't have any reason to believe that it's going to happen, and I think that the powers that be, both at Georgia and across the college football landscape, are going to do everything they can to prevent that. And, there's also a chance that we have some, more good news as you start moving towards that. But you better believe that, month ago wasn't really following that news really at all. It wasn't very relevant for me. But just given the fact that you're starting to see, more things happening, it feels more relevant now than it did, I believe. Foster Moss says, I believe we're going to see a lot of A.D. Mitchell early. Yeah, listen, in the case of Mitchell, we talked about this at least I talked about this on Cover 4 Live on Thursday, that he was really the talk of the spring, and he had a nice G Day to validate the chatter that he generated prior to that. So I said it would be interesting to see post-scrimmage 1 if there was even more of that talk, because if there were, then that would make him a real factor to be a part of this Georgia wide receiver rotation. I think now you can say that is true, that A.D. Mitchell is a big factor to be a part of the Georgia wide receiver rotation. Coaches talk about this a lot. Smart himself doesn't use this phrase quite as much, but a lot of coaches do. The notion of being kind of above the line, someone who's good enough to be able to play. And almost every roster in college football, you may have 85 scholarship guys, and let's say you have 90 total players between some walk-ons who are a potential factor for playing time. But the honest truth is most coaches don't really feel like they've got 85 guys from that group of scholarship players who they feel like they could put into a game. They don't have, a full complement of guys who they believe are above the line, ready to play right now. And there is something to be said for Georgia having one additional player good enough to play than maybe we would have thought, because as a 3-star signee from the class of 2021, A.D. Mitchell is not a guy that I thought would be playing for Georgia this year. Now, you can say, well, B.A., I knew him when he was in high school, or knew him before, he kind of, because he missed, obviously, a good amount of time. I knew him before all of that, and I knew this was going to happen. I'll give you credit for that. You may have been right about that. But in this particular case, that's not someone who I thought was going to be ready to go for Georgia as quickly as it seems like he's going to. Now, does that mean he's going to be all SEC and 800 yards receiving, something along those lines? No, I don't necessarily think it means that. But as I said before, there's incredible value in just having someone who is good enough to play, someone that you trust to be on the field, be a part of your rotation. And the fact that Georgia's got an additional name, Mitchell, that it probably didn't think it was going to have, or at least a lot of folks near the program may not have thought it was going to have, for UGA, that is certainly a good thing. Wyatt Fielding looking forward to seeing Chaz Chambliss. One of mine, as far as like freshmen I'm looking forward to, is Nyland Green. Green is just and listen, I don't know where he ranks in all this competition right now, but I mentioned this in one of my shows back in the summer. I don't think we talked enough about him, and I think that Green's going to be a factor here. I do. Let's see what else. Rodney Hewitt says UGA needs to think about changing the strength and conditioning program to more of Alabama style, not placing blame, but Saban doesn't change for no reason. So, Rodney, here's what I'm going to say, and this is not a shot at you, but I 100% believe this, that it is goofy superstition to assume at Alabama that, the injuries they had, prior to the most recent strength and conditioning staff they hired, that somehow that was the fault of Scott Cochran or anything else. I mean, it's the most gump behavior in the world to blame injuries, which happen for every football team all the time. It's the most, gumpish thing in the world for Alabama fans to blame that on Cochran. We said this at the time. This is one of those things I've been very consistent about this. A few years ago, they were beating up on Gus Malzahn about this at Auburn. These were reporters were giving him a bunch of grief about that because he had a spate of defensive backs who got hurt. And I said at the time, it is superstitious nonsense to connect this stuff together and say that somehow it's the fault of the program that a couple of players in the same position group got hurt. When Alabama had the same thing at linebacker a couple of years ago, said the same thing. At Georgia, who has a small number of players somewhat banged up right now over the course of summer practice, or if you want to say the multitude of wide receivers who have been more seriously hurt, but all of them for different reasons. Football is just a sport where luck is a big part of what happens. It may be as much of a third of what happens in football is how lucky you are avoiding injuries or how unlucky you are in terms of, having extra injuries kind of come your way. Rodney, I understand the concern. I'm not saying this to criticize you. I'm just saying there is a bunch of nonsense out there that it's not just unique to Georgia or Alabama or anywhere else. People want to blame the team when a player gets hurt, even though football is a dangerous, violent sport where guys get hurt all the time. Connor.
If Georgia doesn't hire away Scott Cochran is almost still certainly the strength and conditioning coach at Alabama, correct?
100%. Yeah, all of this idea that somehow that Ballou, whether the guy's name they hired, they ushered in some new sports science, innovation in Alabama. This was something that Nick Saban just made up, and because he's got the media in his back pocket, they ran with that and turned that into a huge narrative. But Connor's 100% right. Had Cochran not taken the job at Georgia, he would have still been in Alabama. They were not going to fire him because deep down, Nick Saban knows it wasn't Cochran's fault that a couple of Alabama players got hurt. It's just something he started saying because it sounded good after Cochran left for Georgia.
Wow. Nick Saban saying something that sounded good, even if it's maybe not entirely true. Where have we heard that on this airwaves before?
Exactly. When it comes to like the Bryce Young thing and the NIL stuff, that to me it's despicable. What Saban did, because he gave voice what was essentially just a message board hysteria, right? The notion of what's wrong with Alabama? They get all these injuries. Like Nick Saban actually gave that voice from podiums and press conference. I think it's beneath his dignity as a head coach. And to the extent that Georgia, even if you want to isolate the wide receiver injuries, because there have been, of the 4 top 10 receivers Georgia signed over the course of the last 3 years, all 4 of them have been hurt, and 3 of them have been hurt pretty seriously. That's just bad. I'm 100% certain that's just bad luck. There is literally no one to blame. It's one of the worst things with the sports conversation is that when something happens, we got to find somebody to blame for it. There are plenty of things that happen that just happen, and there is no one to blame. And in this particular case, I believe that's what's true.
I would agree.
All right, a couple other things real quick. Crow-King123 says, what's actually true is God just hates us, plain and simple. Now, I can't disprove that fact as of yet. I am open to that hypothesis. But that's kind of that. Mark Abe says, you all made Bama losing Cochran a big deal when it wasn't, but him leaving UGA for a time isn't a big deal. The only reason why, Mark, I made Cochran leaving Alabama a big deal is because I thought Nick Saban treated him poorly. I think it speaks to Nick Saban's character as a person. Here's what I've said about Nick Saban a million times. It is obvious he's a great coach. I think it's also fairly obvious that he might not be too good of a guy. And if you're that disloyal to someone who's been loyal to you the way that Cochran was forever, and I can promise you this, and I know this firsthand, there are plenty of former Alabama players who like Cochran a lot more than they like Saban. They don't even really feel like they know Nick Saban. He was just some guy in an office who was raking in millions of dollars. But the person who actually cared about them, the person who actually was side by side with them and helping them become better men day after day was a guy like Cochran, because the offseason is longer than the in-season. And a guy like Scott Cochran, when he was at Alabama, was kind of as has been described, the head coach of the offseason. So the story of Cochran leaving Alabama was not that it debilitated the Crimson Tide. It just sort of showed the kind of person that Nick Saban is, the fact that he had no interest in giving Cochran any kind of professional development opportunity, and he essentially trashed him on the way out the door with innuendo that I think can fairly easily be disproven. So the issue with Cochran leaving Alabama is not what it did to Alabama, but what it said about Nick Saban. I'll come back to YouTube in a minute. Let me get a few Facebook comments. Over here on Facebook for a moment. And we got to get ready to go after that. Barry Watkins says, what's the status of Darnell Washington? There was a little bit of chatter yesterday about being a little bit banged up. I don't get the sense it's anything all that serious necessarily. I guess there's been phrases like walking boots and crutches being used, but sometimes that doesn't necessarily have to mean, anything all that serious. Obviously, we'll be listening very closely on it. I know Georgia fans are kind of tired of hearing about these kinds of things, but I do think that speaks more just to the general restlessness that exists when you get this close to the season, more so than anything else. But obviously that chatter had been out there, but there's no way to know that it's anything too serious right now. Let's see what else. Calvin Sanders mentioning, I guess DJ Daniel was released from his NFL team. So Daniel back on the open market. We'll wish him well as he looks to catch on here with a new team. Sometimes this also happens there as well. It's like, guys bounce around a little bit and maybe they eventually find a new home. That opportunity to be back on the open market again for some players ends up being kind of a good thing. Matt Rukavina said, did you see that Zaxby's has officially stated on Twitter that JT is their quarterback? Yeah, that's a cool thing. I think that Zaxby's, not to give the free plug here, but I think that Zaxby's is a good relation. Georgia quarterback and Zaxby's just seems like a pretty good relationship all the way around. I'm very happy for that. I think the trading card deal that Daniels has signed, even though there's some controversy around that, I think that's actually really good. These are tangible deals, right? That it's easy to understand how he's going to make money from that, as opposed to Nick Saban and the easily falsifiable statement about Bryce Young. In the case of JT Daniels, we see some real deals that he signed. Now, do I think the trading card deal is going to be worth 7 figures? Probably not. But it's very easy to understand how he's going to get paid actual real folding money for that. And the Zaxby thing there too. Richard Sheffield says 2 names I'd love to never hear on DawgNation again: Nick Saban and Justin Fields. I'm sure other people feel the same way. Let's see what else. Tim Tatum says Georgia Tech shut down practice due to a lack of focus and energy. Boy, I'm telling you right now, we don't have much reason to pay much attention to him. That Jeff Collins, man, he's a character and a half. And I don't mean that necessarily in a good way. Brian Williamson, on the subject of Washington for Clemson, I just think it's and I'm not trying to give you coach speak, but I think it's way too early to be in any way concerned about Washington's status for that Clemson game. It's still a little ways away. Yes, he was a little bit banged up, but I haven't, based on the online chatter that's out there, I haven't seen anybody suggest that it's anything too serious. Listen, you need Darnell against Clemson, but as of right now, we have no reason to think that won't be what happens. Charles Kaiser says right now Brock Bowers is the only healthy tight end. That's right. John Fitzpatrick did miss the scrimmage of the day, Kirby Smart told us. So, it's just kind of that thing this time of year. I know Georgia fans are just very weary of bad news because they feel like that they've had a lot of that, and I do get that. I don't want to necessarily downplay it, but a lot of these injuries have a way of magically healing as you get right there before that game against Clemson too. Somebody mentioned somebody getting the R.S. Andrews deal. Hopefully we'll keep our own R.S. Andrews deals. Brandon Griffin says, what will the NFL do when these kids start getting 8-figure deals? LOL, redshirt me, coach. I don't know. Maybe that's coming down the line at some point in time. Calvin Sanders looking forward to seeing the Dogs beat up on Tech again this year. Yeah, been a little while since we've been able to see that for sure. Robert Hosea says, as a Bears and UGA Dog fan, you will never stop hearing about Fields. Yeah, listen, Robert, you're right about that. Those folks in Chicago are really happy about Justin. I got to tell you, I'm a fan of Justin Fields, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does there in a Bears uniform. First of all, when you think about it as a kid, like playing in the NFL, like the Bears are one of the teams that just, even though they've only really been good, like a small window of my life, they just seem like a very NFL team, right? It's like you close your eyes, you imagine playing in the NFL, Soldier Field for the Bears. It's just one of those teams that feels like the NFL. So I think Justin's in a great town. I think the Bears are a classic organization. I think the uniform looks good on him. And I'm really excited to see how that goes. Very excited. Let me go back over to YouTube for a moment. Christopher Pryor wants to see some Georgia beatdowns this year. Yeah, you and me both on that, Christopher. You and me both. Let's see what else. Real Big Lee says he wants an NIL deal with Classic City Lager. He says he wants Creature Comforts to sign a deal with him because he loves that Classic City Lager. That's a good idea, Real Big Lee. That'd be a very nice one, right? That'd be really good all the way around. Let's see what else. Everybody going back and forth with G. Grace as per usual. Always like to see that. Crow-Kinked 123 says he's going to become an Alabama fan. That way they'll never win another national championship. It's a very interesting strategy. Bank 6 talking about the way that like some of the NFL teams practice together. You know, we're seeing that. I guess the Falcons are going down to practice with the Dolphins for a couple of days before their preseason game. That would be kind of an interesting thing to do in college. Nature Gator on the subject of Tim Tebow being cut. Like, the one thing I'm not is really a Tebow hater. I mean, I don't like the Florida version of Tim Tebow. I didn't like him, but the Tebow in general, I'm not really a Tebow hater. And, you know, I don't mind the fact that he gave it a try. Let's see what else. G. Gray says I was hating on Nick Saban. Robert Barnes says, is Bryce Young going to share his NIL money with the team? So, I hate to be this way, but I do feel like that some of the players are being made to feel an undue responsibility to share their money with their teammates. Not to say it's not a nice thing. And, you know, listen, you know, picking up the check every now and then is never a bad thing for anybody to do. But this idea that somehow you're a bad person if you're not sharing your NIL money. I mean, we don't say that about, like, you know, professional athletes and their actual paycheck. I mean, listen, I try to be generous and take care of, you know, everybody that I can take care of, but I also got a family to feed, right? So in the case of like JT Daniels, I mean, it's fine to me that he's supposedly sharing his NIL stuff, and I guess to a degree I'm not even really – like some of the NIL stuff, it's sort of hard to know what the definition of some of this stuff really is. There's a lot of liberties being taken with NIL reporting, I would say. But I'm never going to make a player feel like you've got to share any kind of name, image, likeness, revenue that comes your way, or really anything else there as well. If you want to, that's fine. But this notion that you're a bad teammate if you don't, I don't buy into that quite as much. Now I understand that right now the name of the game, NIL-wise, is to get some earned media so you get more NIL deals. I get all of that, and there's nothing that, you know, the average reporter sort of laps up more than, ooh, he's going to share it with his teammates. And so you get some free press for that. But to JT or to anybody else, share it if you want to, but don't feel like you have to. That's at least my opinion on that.
Do you worry the merits of capitalism are tearing apart locker rooms across college football?
I ain't getting into that one way or another. I'm just saying, if you earn the money, don't feel like you got to share it. That's my only take on that. But if JT wants to, then good for him for doing that. Because for a lot of these guys, I mean, that's another thing why I can't get that excited about the NIL thing. For like DJ Uiagalelei and JT Daniels and even Bryce Young, even though that, you know, no good liar Nick Saban has exaggerated his worth here, they're all going to be rich 5 minutes from now anyway. It's like, I can't get that excited about them being rich like a few weeks earlier than they otherwise would have been. Like you know, when the BYU guys get the walk-on money, that's fine. I'm not like mad that the quarterbacks are getting the money, but they were going to get this money anyway a little bit later on. They're just getting it a little bit earlier. So the idea that this is some revelation that is, you know, been, you know, centuries in the making, I don't quite see it that way. I mean, some of the reporting that's gone on, like the average NIL deal is about $50.
Yeah, the high-end deals, of course, they're going to go to the quarterbacks. Those guys are the stars. I mean, even if, you know, Kendall Milton has the season every Georgia Online fan thinks he's going to have, he's not going to touch the money that, say, a JT Daniels could make or a Brock Vandagriff could potentially make.
Yeah, just quarterbacks just, you know, have more potential with some of that kind of stuff. Now, there will be a few non-quarterbacks who maybe cash in, but, you know, quarterbacks, generally speaking, are always going to have that. And for most of these guys, it's just like you're just accelerating what would have happened like a few months from now.
I will say so. Oregon defensive end Kayvon Thibodeau, who is probably right now the number one overall pick in the 2022 NFL draft, apparently today it was announced that he is a spokesperson now doing an ad sponsorship for United Airlines.
Are you serious?
So, yeah, I saw that today.
So, I mean, that's a little bit different. Like when he came out with like the idea that he was going to sell an NFT for like $150,000 or something like that. You ain't selling no NFT for $150,000. As somebody who knows a little something about that, you're not doing that.
So I know you're not a big fan of, saying non-sponsors on the show, but, in light of JT getting a deal with a certain chicken supplier yesterday, one of the popular talking points was, because, that chicken sponsor has a relationship to the city of Athens.
Sure. Very tight.
When you were in college, is there a preferred name, image, and likeness potential sponsorship that you would have loved to have represented?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, like a Popeyes would have been kind of, because Popeyes is popular now.
As someone who has traveled with BA, it is his meal of choice on the road.
Like I would have liked that, even back then. Like I liked Popeyes when nobody like when it was not like this like hipster thing online. I like Popeyes big time. But the stuff that I really like is all the barbecue joints that are doing the offensive linemen. Like I really like that. And so like whatever like the local barbecue joint is, I'd have been happy just to have that. And the way that like Arkansas has done this, a few other places have done that, those are probably my favorite NIL deals. And the honest truth is, if I could get free meals anywhere, probably like a local barbecue joint. It didn't have to be like the fancy place that Southern Living writes about. Just like a nice hole-in-the-wall barbecue joint. That'd probably be about as much as I would ever probably need.
I would say one was a downtown Athens establishment, which unfortunately is not able to sponsor players through NIL, no alcohol, things of that nature, but there is one. And then the other one, which leads me to, my larger take on JT's deal with that chicken establishment, is Raising Cane's. I ate so much Raising Cane's in college. I actually had a friend who, I kid you not, lost 30 pounds after college simply because he stopped eating Raising Cane's. It's right across the street from the Red and Black. I know Spencer Rattler is sponsored by Raising Cane's. It's going to be interesting to see how, because Bojangles has DJ Uiagalelei and Sam Howell sponsoring them. JT Daniels is the first one with Zaxby's. Spencer Rattler is with Cane's. It's going to be interesting to see how all these chicken quarterbacks measure up at the end of the year.
Now, my absolute favorite deal is the one that DJ also got with Dr. Pepper. I try not to drink a lot of soda, but I love Dr. Pepper. I've always loved it. And so to think, because anytime you go to like the SEC championship or things like that, when they have just like Dr. Pepper flowing like a waterfall all throughout that stadium, I love that. And so I'm super jealous of Uiagalelei for the Dr. Pepper deal more so than anything else. All right, one or two more. We're going to get ready to get out of here. Jordan Bowman says he got sick of Raising Cane's. That and like say
that's impossible.
Guthrie's, like I've never liked those places as much as other people do. Although I admit that I'm certainly very much in the minority on that. Bank 6, and we try not to give too many free plugs. That's one of the challenges. Like you try to report the news now. You got to be like a business reporter as much as anything else with those NIL deals. But I ain't giving away this stuff for free on this thing. I got my own NIL deal I'm trying to worry about over here. I can't be giving these players stuff for free now. Back over here on Facebook, we're getting ready to go. Cisco Hurtado says, if you had to guess, who will be leaving for head coach after Dan Lanning? So if you want to say Lanning is first up. By the way, I know that you're going to think Cortez Hankton on the Luther Burden thing, but keep Dan Lanning in mind on that too. Big time ties to the state of Missouri. So keep Lanning in mind as a guy that could be a weapon in that Luther Burden recruitment down the line. But if we say he's the next person in the Georgia staff to be a head coach, I got to think that Del McGee's right there after that. I really do. And that's no disrespect to Todd Monken. But we saw Charles Huff leave Alabama, take the Marshall job. It's easy to do that at Alabama because the job is that line on the resume, having worked at Alabama, is such a big deal. I have a very strong feeling that McGee's probably a very good interviewer. He's got all kinds of gravitas with the way that he carries himself. We've seen running backs coaches, as I said before, kind of get those jobs now. So I got to say that Del McGee is sooner rather than later doing that. Santi D. Arnold says, if you could be Kirby, what do you think it would take to get favored in every game in 2022 and beyond? Ooh, that's a really good question. So Georgia is not a favorite in every game in 2021. They are not a point spread favorite against Clemson. They will be a favorite in every game other than that. And they could be, at least it's a remote possibility, they could be a double-digit favorite in every game the rest of the way beyond Clemson. But they're not favored against Clemson. They haven't been consistently throughout the discussion on this. Clemson has been at least more than a field goal favorite, and I think the number's even gone up a little bit since then, 4.5 in some places. So what does it take to have Georgia be favored in every game in 2022? That's a really good question. I think obviously the easiest answer is Georgia just has to be slightly more dynamic on offense, first of all, right? You've got to show up and consistently score points. Even like the big explosive game that JT Daniels had against Mississippi State last year. That was the big coming out party for Daniels in his first start. And he's throwing the ball all over the yard. But Georgia only scored 35 points that day. That these really big point totals for Georgia in comparison to other teams, even in days in which Georgia is moving the football, sometimes the points don't quite go with that the way that you think they might. And here's the other thing. We think of Georgia as being a really powerful defensive program, and they have been. But you got to be good defensively against a team that can score. In other words, it's one thing to shut out Kentucky in 2019 in the rain or shut out Kentucky last year. It's one thing to shut out Kentucky every year. It's another thing to hold a team that's used to scoring 40 and find a way to hold them to 21 or 24 even or 27 even. If Georgia's going to be favored in every game in 2022, which I think is a really good question, it's about scoring more points on a more consistent basis. It's about also getting stops against teams that are good enough to move the football. They gave up 37 to LSU in 2019. Gave up, 35, is that right, to Alabama in 2018. Gave up, goodness knows, big point totals to both Florida and Alabama a year ago. But against good offenses that can move the football, getting 3 or 4 stops against those teams and taking a team that's in the 40s and putting them in the 20s, if you do that, then you could very well see Georgia favored in every game in 2022, and that would mean would think some good things on the field for the Dogs in 2021. That's a very interesting question. All right, to wrap things up here today, let's get ready to say goodbye to all of you. I'll remind you to check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, our friends there at AJC.com. And, y'all, I promise you, we're not going to ever, we talk about college football, that's our thing here, but some of you are correctly keeping your eye on what's going on in the rest of the news over there. There's some, when it comes to the coronavirus, stuff like that, you got to be paying close attention to that, right? I mean, as I've told you before, the thing that I really resonate with are some of the personal stories that I'm hearing again. After not really hearing any of those for months, starting to hear those again. And, I just pray that everybody just stays healthy and safe and figures out how to do that for themselves. And we just get ready for a fun college football season. I certainly want that. And obviously, you got to be paying attention to how some of the policies could be changing in the weeks and months to come. And all of that for you at AJC.com. And on a more happier note, the situation with the Braves in the National League East is getting really, really fascinating. Phillies and Mets have had their struggles. They're also playing better competition right now than when Atlanta's playing. But you know what? This is Atlanta's time to make its move, and it's doing that. They beat up on a good Cincinnati team the other night, beating up on Miami last night. As I said before, getting a Noah back. It's just heady times here for the Braves. This infield, Dansby's on the rise. Austin Riley looks like one of the top young guys, really filling out his full potential here. Obviously, just a lot of fun right now. And plenty of great coverage for you on that online at AJC.com as well. Thanks for being here for R.S. Andrews Cool Down. You'll check out R.S. Andrews online for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. Hope all of you have a great day. I look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. I'll look forward to talking to you then, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.